Before delving into what happened, let me introduce myself. Hi, I'm Emily and I am 17 years old. I recently graduated from high school with straight A's and have been navigating the ups and downs of life alongside my 36-year-old single mother. She's a talented chef, leading the kitchen of one of the finest Italian restaurants in our city. But despite her culinary prowess, our relationship has often been strained, especially since she remarried. It's been quite the journey, filled with unexpected twists and turns, but I'm learning to find my path amidst the chaos. My parents divorced when I was 10 years old. Initially, they co-parented me, but things changed when my dad was diagnosed with brain cancer. He used to run the trucking business his parents had started, but his illness forced his brother to take over. Earlier, I used to alternate between living with my mom and dad every week. However, after my dad's diagnosis, I had to move in with my mom full-time. Even though I visited my dad often, I missed living with him dearly. I've always been closer to my dad compared to my mother. While my mom had her good moments, our relationship has been strained. She tended to be overly tense, leading to constant conflicts. At first, she fought with my dad, and after the divorce, our clashes continued. However, I had to make peace with living with her after my dad's diagnosis. Recently, our relationship has soured further due to her new husband, Robert. My mother married him just 8 months ago. She had been dating Robert for over a year, keeping their relationship a secret until he proposed. The significant age gap between them, coupled with my dad's illness, made the situation more challenging. Nonetheless, I had to accept it, although I never trusted Robert. His overly sweet demeanor felt insincere, and his behavior raised suspicions. Robert, a high school football coach, moved in with us after the wedding. As he arrived home earlier than my mother, we often found ourselves alone together. Strangely, he never initiated conversations with me during these moments. Still, whenever my mother was around, he put on a charming facade, pretending to be my best buddy. His deception was evident, and I saw through it. One day, while fetching food from the kitchen, I heard a creaking sound from my mom's bedroom. Knowing about her secret locker under the bed containing valuable jewelry and cash, I was alarmed to see Robert taking out a bundle of money. Shocked, I froze in place. Catching me outside the bedroom, Robert feigned innocence and claimed my mom had asked for the cash. Despite my doubts, I didn't confront my mom immediately. When I eventually mustered the courage to talk to her, she dismissed my concerns, assuming I disapproved of her relationship with Robert or wanted her to reconcile with my dad. Frustrated by her refusal to listen, I backed off, feeling insulted by her unquestioning loyalty to Robert. Months passed, and our relationship deteriorated further as my mom remained infatuated with Robert. Then, about a week ago, she sat me down for a critical conversation. Alone with her, I braced myself for bad news about my dad, only to be blindsided when she revealed that Robert felt uncomfortable around me and wanted me to leave the house. I made him feel safe and unwanted. Now I knew that my mother was smitten with Robert, but I couldn't even see this coming. Kicking your daughter out due to your husband's insecurity over practically nothing made no sense to me. I knew that Robert was afraid of me telling my mother about the locker incident, and also just generally scared that someday I'd force my mother to take her rose-colored glasses off and see him for what he indeed was. But he didn't have any reason to worry because, after the way my mother had spoken to me when I tried to tell her the truth, she made sure that I didn't say anything to her at all beyond that point. In any case, I was so bloody done with my mom that I didn't even bother to argue with her and just said, "Okay," then got up and started packing. My head was pounding with anger while I was packing, and I honestly wanted to wait for Robert to come home so I could punch him in the face. But then I found my mother's spare keys to the locker and had a better idea. I snuck into my mom's room while she was watching television in the living room, grabbed her bag, took out the keys, and then took them away. I also left a note in her purse saying that if she wanted to know where her original keys were, she could talk to Robert about it to make sure that he wouldn't get away with this scot-free. After I was done packing my clothes, books, and some other miscellaneous stuff that I'd need, I walked to the living room to say goodbye to my mother. She seemed surprised because she hadn't expected me to pack up and leave that day itself, which is also why she'd been watching television in the living room instead of helping me. Despite the initial shock, she got over it super quickly and hugged me goodbye. There was not a single tear in her eye, and neither did she seem unhappy about the situation. It was painfully evident that none of this seemed problematic to her at all. I left the house and boarded the bus that took me to my dad's house, which happened to be far away from my mother's place. It was about 2,000 meters away in the suburbs, which is part of the reason why I used to live with my mom. My dad was still undergoing treatment and had to be in and out of the hospital frequently. He lived with his brother, who took care of him. Whenever I'd visit him, which was almost every week, I tried to keep the conversation light and buoyant so he wouldn't worry too much about me. I missed him, but I also cared about him and his health way too much. So I had never shared anything about Robert or my mother with him. Whenever he'd ask me how I was doing at home and how my mother and her new husband were treating me, I'd lie to him and tell him that it was all good. But now I couldn't do that anymore and had to tell him the truth about everything, which I did without any qualms because it was vital for him to know this. I told him every single thing that had happened. When I got to talking about the events of that particular day, my dad got so mad that his ears went red, which was the first time I'd ever seen it happen. I was worried that he'd fly off the handle and that wouldn't be good for his health. But he managed to contain himself. To appease him, I also told him how I'd taken the key and the note that I'd left, which would ensure that my mother found out about Robert's thieving. That made him feel slightly better, and he told me that I was clever for doing that. My dad and my uncle then told me not to worry about anything and said that they were perfectly fine with taking care of me. The only reason they'd even agreed to let me move in with my mom full-time was that they thought it would be easier and more convenient for me. But if this were the case, then they'd happily take me back. I was also happier with my dad and my uncle, so I didn't mind that my mother had sent me away on the first day. I didn't hear back from my mother at all, and neither did my father. But the very next day, my mother sent me a video of Robert sobbing and apologizing to me for whatever had happened. He was begging me to come back because he'd realized that he'd screwed up by stealing from the woman who'd put her heart and soul into the relationship. My mother texted me, saying that this video was supposed to be proof that Robert did feel guilty about whatever he had done and for forcing her to kick me out. My plan had worked, and when she'd noticed the missing keys and the note, she'd confronted Robert about it, and he'd been left with no choice but to come out with the truth. It was satisfying to see him crying, but when my mother sent me another text saying that she'd only forgive him if I came back, it stopped being fun and just got exasperating. She should have known that there was no way I was going back to that hell where I was being treated like I was invisible all the time. I was either invisible or being treated like a burden, and neither of those two choices seemed like something anyone would want to pick from. For my mother to even leave the choice to me was ridiculous, because it should have been her choice to end that marriage and apologize to me for what she did. If Robert was the bad guy here, so was she. And probably even worse than Robert, because at least he wasn't related to me. She, being my mom, had kicked me out for another man, and that was unforgivable. It wasn't just Robert who should have apologized. She should also have regretted what she had put me through. Instead, she was treating this as some sick game. I didn't understand why she'd left the fate of her marriage up to me to be decided, but since she had left it up to me, I chose to say that I wasn't going to come back, and she had to leave Robert. In response to that, she sent me another video of a much calmer but still upset-looking Robert saying that he understood where I was coming from, but he loved my mom and just needed one last opportunity to prove it to us. It sounded like he was on the verge of tears and was going to start begging me on his knees any moment now, and that made me feel bad. But I still wasn't convinced, so I said that my decision was final. To that, my mother finally replied, saying that I was being way too harsh on both of them. Here were two grown adults trying to get me to forgive them, and even putting their happiness and marriage at stake for my sake. But I didn't care about any of that and only wanted to push them even further away. I didn't know what to say to her, so I just ignored her text and didn't reply. It's been 6 days since then, and every day she's been texting me and trying to get me back. Every single day, there's a video message from her and Robert in which they apologize to me for mistreating me. She's told me repeatedly in the videos that unless I agree to come back, she'll file for divorce to prove to me that she's serious. Yesterday, she even told me that she'd been speaking to a lawyer and sent me texts to confirm that it was true. Robert also looked upset in the video message they sent and begged me to forgive him because he couldn't afford to lose a woman like my mother. Are you enjoying the story so far? Show your support by liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's dive back into the story. I know that I'm destroying their marriage, but to be honest, I feel like whatever my mother is doing is sick, and I can't bring myself to dignify it with a response of any kind. Not only is she torturing her husband, but she's also putting me through something very unnecessary. Because I don't think I'm the one who needs to make a call about what to do in a situation like this. She shouldn't be putting the responsibility of deciding about her marriage on my shoulders in the first place. That makes me look like the reason their marriage had to end was that her daughter wasn't happy about her marriage. So far, I think everyone knows that that's not the case, and I'd hate to feel guilty like that. But she's just putting me on the spot, so it's not like I have a way out of this anyway. Robert's not a good guy, but he's still a human being, and it's wild that he's allowing himself to be treated this way at all just because my mother's more decadent than him. It's dehumanizing, and I can't believe he's just letting her do this to him. Every day, I haven't told my dad about it because I don't want him to worry about me. And I know that if I tell him, he'll intervene. And that'll be another dramatic showdown that I don't want him to take on. I feel terrible, but I don't know what to do here. AITA for refusing to decide whether my mother should divorce her husband. Update 1. The consensus was that I should tell my dad about what I was going through instead of trying to deal with all my problems myself. It's true because I tend to take it all on myself instead of speaking up and asking for help when I need it. I feel bad telling my dad because I think it might be bothersome for him since he has so much on his plate already. I mean, he's a literal cancer patient, so it's not easy for me to go to him with my problems the way I used to before his diagnosis. I think if I just tried to talk to him, then maybe I wouldn't have had to go through so much because he wouldn't have allowed it at all. This time, I finally told my dad all about my mother and her sick techniques, and he called her up and tore into her. She tried to tell my dad that this was none of his business, but he wasn't having it and told her that he'd be filing for full custody and that he'd make sure she wouldn't ever get to see me after this. She was protesting against it, but both my dad and I knew that she didn't care about me. She cared more about what other people would think of her when they found out that she'd lost custody of her only daughter because she decided to put her husband over her daughter. That's why she was fighting with my dad over me, not because she loved me. If she loved me, she would have been a better mother, and that was something she'd never even tried to be. Now, it was just too late. After the phone call with my mom, my dad explained to me the same things that people in the comments had told me. That I was his daughter, and that I didn't need to think twice before coming to him with a problem because, as a father, he could never think of me as a burden. My well-being was his responsibility, and his cancer wasn't going to prevent him from giving me the best life and solving my problems whenever he needed to step in. And I needed to remember that. I won't lie. I teared up at that point because it just reminded me that even though he was a lot weaker than I remembered, he was still my strong dad underneath. I ended up breaking down because, after a long time, I finally felt that I was safe and loved again. Thanks to my mother and Robert, I'd completely forgotten how that feeling was. Still, my dad reminded me again that no sickness in the world was going to stop him from protecting me, and I'll always be grateful for that. Gosh, it sounds so sappy, but I'm thrilled that it's true for me. Update 2. My dad has filed for full custody of me, and my mom isn't going to get any visitation rights either. It doesn't matter since I'm just 1 year away from being a legal adult anyway. But my dad said that he doesn't trust my mother anymore because Robert's presence in her life has turned her head. Recently, she texted me to tell me that I disappointed her by dragging my dad into this, even though I knew he was sick, and called me a selfish and manipulative brat. She also added that she was pleased now that she hadn't divorced Robert over what I said. I was accused of trying to drive a wedge between them because that's the kind of petty person I was. But I'd failed, and she and Robert were now more vital than ever. She would gladly give up custody of me because I don't deserve to be her daughter anyway. There were a couple of other mean things she said, but I don't care. She can say whatever she wants, but it won't change the fact that she's the one who failed as a mother, and the reason she's getting so defensive now is that she knows it. My maternal grandparents have threatened to cut her off, but she doesn't even care about that. She's that crazy about Robert. I mean, I don't even know what to say about this woman. I've had my differences with my mother growing up, but this is just wild. She's beyond help if you ask me. At least my grandparents have tried to knock some sense into their daughter, but even that's not working. And if her parents can't bring her back to her senses, then we're not going to be able to accomplish that. My dad's been kind enough to allow her parents to see me still because they've never done anything wrong. I wish she'd been able to take a leaf out of their book and learn how to have a good relationship with your ex. even after divorce. Because even my grandparents are divorced. And despite that, they've done their best to raise my mom to be a robust and successful woman. Now she's almost in her 40s, so they can't be held responsible for whatever she's up to now. Unfortunately, my mother failed on all fronts as a wife, as a mother, and even as a daughter. Update 3. Hey everyone! It was a bittersweet day today. My mother finally terminated her parental rights over me, and I'm legally free from her now. I decided to accompany my father for the signing. I saw her again today, probably for the last time in a while. She didn't acknowledge my existence at all and didn't even look at me. I didn't know how to feel, very honestly, and I still don't. Like, I'm sad, but I'm also relieved. I don't know. I just have mixed feelings about all of this. Robert wasn't there, which was no big surprise because that thief probably didn't have the spine to face me after whatever happened. It was only my mother's actions that hurt me anyway. He can go to hell because he's very irrelevant in my life. My dad and uncle took me out for dinner to make me feel better today, and that did cheer me up a little. 2 days ago, we also learned that my dad is getting better, and slowly but surely there's a real chance of him beating cancer. So if everyone could pray for that, that'd be great. I love my dad, and at this point he's my only parent, so I can't lose him. I just can't. My uncle's excellent, but he's not my dad and nobody will ever be like him ever. I don't know how much time I have with him, but I hope that whatever time we have together is only good times and nothing else. Nevertheless, I hope you guys keep us in your prayers, and thank you to all of you who responded. Thanks for watching. How did you find the story? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome stories like this. Your feedback and support mean a lot.